The doctors told us he had only a few hours to live, but it's been 3 days. Were they wrong? If you ever found yourself asking that question, today's conversation is for you. Because when someone we love lives longer than we expected, it can make us question everything. Maybe he's getting better. Maybe the doctors were wrong. Maybe we made the decision for comfort care too soon. Those are incredibly human thoughts. And if you ever had them, I want you to know you are not alone. Today, I want to help make sense of what is really happening during those moments because understanding what you're saying can bring peace during one of the most difficult seasons a family can experience. One of the hardest parts of serious illness is that medicine can often recognize when someone is approaching the end of life, but we cannot predict the exact moment death will occur. When the timeline unfolds differently than we expected, many families begin questioning everything they had been told. Was the prognosis wrong? Has something changed? Should we still be focusing on comfort? Those questions deserve thoughtful answers. By the end of today's conversation, you will understand why someone may live longer than expected, what healthcare team are actually looking for when they talk about prognosis, and one important question you can take into your next conversation with your healthcare team. Before we dive into today's conversation, if you're new here or you've been part of our community, welcome to Care Navigator. My name is Judy, and I'm a caregiver educator, a DNP prepared hospice and palliative care nurse practitioner. I'm also a caregiver for my own mother who has kidney failure and receives dialysis. So while I spend my days working alongside patients and families professionally, I also understand what it is like to sit in the family chair, to love someone deeply, and to want to make the best decision you can for them. I created Care Navigated because I believe caregivers deserve more than medical information. They deserve understanding, they deserve guidance, and they deserve practical tools that help them navigate difficult decisions with clarity, confidence, and compassion. Everything we talk about here is meant to educate and empower caregivers. Every situation is unique, so always discuss medical decisions with your own healthcare team. Now, let's slow this down together. Recently, I cared for a gentleman with advanced cancer. His illness had reached a point where the treatment that had once helped were no longer working. Despite the healthcare team's best efforts, his body continued to decline. His oncology team met with the family and explained that, based on everything they were seeing, they believed he was likely in the final hours of his life. His adult son loved his father deeply. After talking with the medical team, he made one of the hardest decisions a family can make. He agreed to focus on comfort and changed his father's code status to do not resuscitate. The goal was no longer to prolong life at all costs, but to keep him comfortable and to allow him a peaceful, natural death. But something unexpected happened. His father didn't die that day or the next day. In fact, when I met the family a couple of days later, his father was still alive. Although he remained critically ill, he would occasionally open his eyes. At times, he would respond with a nod or a few words. To his son, that felt completely different from what he had expected. And that's when the questions began. He said, I thought they said Dad only had hours. He's opening his eyes today. Does that mean something has changed? Could he actually be getting better? Those are such natural questions because our minds are constantly trying to make sense of what we are seeing. And if you ever found yourself asking those same questions, I want you to know you are not alone. This is one of the most emotional, confusing parts of caring for someone with serious illness because our minds naturally connect time with accuracy. If someone says hours and your loved one lived for several more days, it's understandable to wonder whether everything else you have been told is also wrong. But here is what I want you to understand. The timeline changed. The illness did not. That is an important distinction. The body was still showing us the same pattern of decline. His cancer had not suddenly improved. His organs had not recovered. The treatments were still no longer controlling the disease. His body was simply taking a different path than anyone could predict. And this is where I often encourage families to gently shift their focus. Instead of asking, how much time do we have left? I encourage them to ask, what is the body showing us today? Because that is the question that helps us make decisions in the present instead of chasing a timeline that none of us can predict. This is actually the first step of the care navigated method, even though I don't always say it by name. We begin by seeing clearly, not what we hope is happening, not what we are afraid is happening, but what the body is actually showing us today. Sometimes that's one of the hardest things to do because love naturally wants to search for signs that things are improving. As both a palliative care nurse practitioner and a family caregiver, I understand that feeling. If my own mother were laying in that bed and suddenly she opened her eyes after someone told me she only had hours to live, I know my heart will probably ask exactly the same question. Could this mean she's getting better? That's such a human response. And that's exactly why this conversation deserves patience, honesty, and compassion. As the days went on, I noticed something that I have seen many times over the years. The son's question slowly began to change. At first, he was trying to understand the timeline. Now he was trying to understand how to care for his father. He began asking, why isn't Dad eating? Shouldn't he be getting IV fluids? If he's sleeping so much, are the pain medication making him worse? Those questions weren't really about food, IV fluids, or pain medication. They were about something much more deeper. They were about love. Because for most of our lives, caring for someone means feeding them, giving them something to drink, making sure they are comfortable, taking them to appointments, doing everything we can to help them get better. So when someone reaches the end of life and those things begin to change, it can feel completely unnatural. If you ever thought, if we are not feeding my loved one, are we giving up? Or if we are not giving IV fluids, aren't we letting them die? I want you to know those questions are incredibly common. And they don't mean you are in denial. They don't mean you are a difficult family member. They mean you love someone deeply. Let's pause here for just a moment because I think this may be one of the most important part of today's conversation. When someone is approaching the end of life, the body begins changing in a way we cannot stop. One of those changes is that the body gradually loses its ability to use food or fluids the way it once did. This is very different from someone who is healthy and simply hasn't eaten all day. In serious illness, especially when someone is actively dying, the body's need begins to change. Appetite naturally decreases. The desire to drink becomes less. The digestive system slows down. The organs become less able to process what they once could. Healthcare teams are looking at patterns. We ask ourselves, is the body responding to treatment? Is the illness continuing to progress despite everything we are doing? Because those patterns often tells us much more than what happens on any one particular day. Sometimes families ask me, but if we can just give IV fluid, won't that make him strong? That's such a reasonable question. And years ago, before I worked in palliative care, I probably would have wondered the same thing. But what we have learned through years of caring for serious illness patients is that IV fluids don't always help when the body's shutting down. In fact, sometimes they can create new problems. Fluids that the body can no longer process may begin collecting in the lungs, making breathing more difficult. They can increase swelling throughout the body. Instead of making someone feel better, they may actually increase discomfort. And that's one of the reasons the healthcare team may recommend against continual IV fluids near the end of life. Not because we want to withhold care, but because our goal has changed. Earlier in the illness, our goal was to help the body recover. Now our goal is to help the person remain as comfortable as possible. That's a very different kind of care. When I sat with this patient's son, I didn't begin by telling him he was wrong. I understood exactly why he was asking those questions. Because if all you have ever known is that food gives people strength and IV fluid helps people recover, then of course those questions make sense. So instead of trying to convince him, we simply slowed the conversation down. We talked about what his father's body was showing us. We talked about how the illness had continued to progress despite treatment. We talked about what comfort focused care was trying to accomplish. Little by little, the conversation shifted, not because someone won an argument, but because understanding began replacing fear. One of the things I've learned in palliative care is that hope doesn't disappear during serious illness. Hope often changes. Earlier in an illness, we hope for a cure. Then we hope that treatment works. Later, we may hope for more time. And sometimes, when time becomes short, hope becomes something different. We hope for comfort. We hope for peace. We hope for meaningful moments together. We hope our loved one doesn't suffer. We hope they know they are not alone. None of these hopes are smaller. They are simply different. My goal is to help hope grow alongside a clear understanding of what the illness is showing us today. Because I believe hope and honesty can exist together. Over the next day or so, his father's condition continued to change. His breathing became more labored, and he spent almost all of his time asleep. He rarely responded when someone spoke to him. Although he had lived longer than anyone expected, the illness itself had continued moving in the same direction. The timeline had changed, but the disease had not. When I visited again, his son quietly looked at me and said, I think I'm starting to understand what everyone has been trying to tell me. That was such an important moment. Not because he had suddenly stopped hoping, not because he loved his father any less, but because understanding had begun replacing uncertainty. And when that happens, families often begin asking different questions. Instead of asking, how do we keep him alive longer? They begin asking, how do we keep him comfortable? That's a very different conversation. I want to pause here because I think this is one of the most meaningful shifts that can happen during serious illness. Sometimes people think accepting what is happening means giving up. I don't see it that way. Acceptance isn't giving up. Acceptance is allowing our hearts to gradually catch up to what the body has already been showing us. It doesn't happen all at once, and it doesn't happen on the same timeline for every family. Some people need hours, some need days, some need much longer, and that's okay. One of the greatest gifts we can offer families as healthcare professionals, it's not simply information. It is time. Time to ask questions, time to process, time to revisit conversations, time for understanding to grow. And one of the greatest gifts we can give ourselves as caregivers is permission to ask those questions without feeling embarrassed or guilty. You don't have to understand everything the first time it's explained. In fact, many families don't. I can't tell you how many times I've sat with a family who had the exact same medical information 2 or 3 different times before everything finally began to make sense. That's not because they weren't listening. It's because grief changes the way we hear information. Fear changes the way we process information. Those emotions are not obstacles. They are part of being human. And that's why I believe serious illness conversation should never be rushed. They deserve patience. They deserve compassion. And they deserve space for understanding to grow. The gentleman I cared for died peacefully not long after that conversation. His son remained at his bedside, holding his father's hand, talking to him, simply being present. I don't know exactly what brought him the greatest comfort that day, but I hope that somewhere along the way, understanding helped replace some of the fear he had been carrying. Because while we couldn't change the outcome of his father's illness, we could help change the way he walked through it. And sometimes that is one of the greatest gifts we can offer another human being. Before we finish today's conversation, I want to leave you with one thought that I hope stays with you. If you remember only one thing from today, let it be this. When someone lives longer than expected, it doesn't automatically mean the healthcare team was wrong. And it doesn't necessarily mean the illness has changed. The timeline may change, the disease may not. That's why instead of focusing on the calendar or the clock, I encourage family to keep asking, what is the body showing us today? That question has the power to shift us from fear and uncertainty towards understanding. And understanding helps us make better decisions. If you're caring for someone with serious illness, here's the question I hope you will take with you into your next conversation with the healthcare team. Can you help me understand what the body is showing us today? And has anything about the illness itself actually changed? I love this question because it invites a conversation. It helps you understand the medical picture today instead of comparing it with what you expected yesterday. Questions like this don't just help you gather information. They help you participate more confidently in some of the most important conversations you will ever have. If someone you love is living with serious illness, I encourage you to write this question down before your next doctor's appointment, family meeting, or hospital visit. Take it with you. Ask it. Then take a few minutes afterwards Write down what you learned, not just about the illness, but about what those changes may mean for the decision ahead. One thoughtful question can bring clarity to the conversation you're having today and confidence for the decision you will make tomorrow. If you would like more questions like this to help you prepare for doctor's appointments, goals of care discussion, and family meetings, I've created a free caregiver decision guide. Inside, you will find 10 thoughtful questions that can help you feel more prepared, ask better questions, and have more meaningful conversation with your healthcare team. You will find the link in the description below. If today's conversation was helpful, I would love to invite you to become part of our Care Navigated community. Every week, we have conversations just like this to help caregivers better understand serious illness, ask better questions, and navigate difficult decisions with greater clarity, confidence, and compassion. If that's the kind of support you're looking for, I'll be honored to have you join us. Remember, you don't have to navigate serious illness alone. Care Navigated is here to help caregivers understand serious illness so they can navigate difficult decisions with clarity, confidence, and compassion. Thank you for choosing to be part of our community. Until next time, take good care of yourself and the person.